Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. So today's been an interesting day. And it's just, I've just been trolling through Sunday like I normally do. And I was looking for stuff and thinking about what I was going to write and what I was going to podcast about for this Monday. And I found several stories that are interesting in the 2A, but more interesting is what's happening in the news around the world. This being a political and gun podcast mostly. Brazil has elected their first ever libertarian president. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's a big deal if you think about it. Because libertarians have always been seen as the sped kids of politics. But us libertarians would argue that we're more freedom-minded than anyone else is. We are not statists. Statists are the ones that usually are okay with, just a little bit of gun bans or just a little bit of law is a good thing. Or we're kind of absolutists when it comes to our freedoms. So to see another country, one that is kind of integral to the world order as it is, go libertarian is kind of interesting. That's the most interesting story to me. You couldn't talk about the news as if you're a NFL fan. I'm not. I used to be. But I'm a Washington Redskins fan, and they'll always be the Redskins to me and not the Washington Commanders, but their name is the Commanders. Tonight, there was a brawl between the Giants and the Redskins, and a player from each side was ejected. Okay? Don't care. It's a sports ball game. What else was more interesting to me is that there's a case that has come up, and I've mentioned it several times on this podcast, Rahimi v. Garland. Okay, so it actually made it to the Supreme Court. And Mr. Rahimi is kind of a bad dude. He's kind of done some bad things. But finding in favor of Rahimi and not actually in favor of the state has given us a lot of latitude for gun rights. It means that red flag laws are kind of not a thing or shouldn't be a thing. And the reason why that is because red flag laws are based off of rumor, conjecture. And yet they strip away your most God-given defensible right. Having an ex-girlfriend or an ex-wife file a restraining order against you immediately strips your rights. That shouldn't be the case. That should have never been the case. And it should have been a lot of people, there should have been a lot of people, I should say, that had stood up and said, this isn't correct. But more interesting to me, well, I guess those are interesting to me. But as I was flipping through the gun tubers, and shout out to my new friend who has started a FFL, so he does background checks, imports, and is selling firearms now, Liberty Gun Works, or Liberty Guns. He's a member of my church group. Give them some love, just like Go Rogue. They'll be at the gun show this the 1st and the 2nd. Go Rogue is awesome. They do background checks and FFL stuff too, but they're more famous for producing killer practice ammunition that works in all types of firearms. But what I was getting to with the gun tuber stuff is how many times can you see an AR-15? You've heard me complain about the AR-15 before, but more and more, the guns we're seeing are just regurgitations of the AR-15. Whether it's an AR-10 or an AR-15, okay, great. We've kind of done that. Where's the innovation? I've mentioned that on one of my podcasts, what went a little longer than what normally is. Well, normal nowadays is about 30 minutes. But I'm tired of seeing the same thing. An AR-15 to me is kind of okay, it's cool, but having a new one come out every other month, a new brand, does nothing for me. Here's why. I've been a gun collector and a shooter for a long time. I already have my AR-15s. I already know what's good, what works. If you're a new shooter, more power to you if you're interested in seeing all the new AR-15s and you want to collect more or whatever. But at one point, you're going to get that the AR-15 is just another rifle. There is nothing unique about it. There's nothing mystic about it. It works just like rifle does. I shoot the rifle. The same could be said about the Kalashnikov. I love the Kalashnikov, and the only reason why I have so much love for it was my first black rifle. So when you see companies like PSA start putting out the Kalashnikov, and you see Riley Defense and a couple others that are starting to make Kalashnikovs in the United States, to me that's a good sign, because normally we'd have to rely on Eastern Europe for the Kalashnikov. With the war in Ukraine and Russian sanctions, we're never going to see those guns again unless Russia comes correct, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. We're not going to see them. Same with cheap steel-cased ammunition to feed those weapons. You know, there is hope that AAC, which is a division of Palmetto State Armory, spins up their manufacturing and fills that stopgap. You know, I understand why everybody's into the 5.56 or the 2.23. To me, they're the same caliber if you look at it ballistically, and people will argue about this, but if you look at the shoulder, you look at what they actually are, realistically, there is very little difference. Unless you have a really old firearm that is directly chambered in 2.23, which means that it's not made to SAAMI spec for the 5.56. The SAAMI spec for the 5.56 is a little spicier, meaning that it's a little more higher pressure. So guns made back then will probably blow primers, but they'll probably still work. The thing is that the innovation has been stifled. And I think part of that is because we've become so comfortable in what we know works. The AR-15 works. I mean, if there is one rifle that is America's rifle, as much as I'd love to tout it's the AR-15 or tout some other bolt-action rifle or a lever gun of any kind, nowadays, if you're a modern shooter, the AR-15 fits the bill. Whether you're hunting, you're plinking, or it's self-defense. If you have one rifle in the Western world, it probably should be an AR-15. Whether it's a 16-inch, a 14-inch with a pinned muzzle device, or a 20-inch, it doesn't matter. If you're happy with your AR-15 and you can do the job you need it to do with that rifle, what's the big deal? I don't see the need for 30 or 40 different brands now coming out with, there's Daniel Defense, there's PSA, there's Anderson Arms, there's and some of these are really Gucci, some of these are really cheap. Sig Sauer makes an AR-15. Everybody's aunt, mother, and dog that manufactures firearms now are making AR-15s. And again, while that's cool that they're exhibiting freedom and let the free market provide, meaning that whichever one takes off, the market will provide and the market will say who's going to be successful and who's not. But I'm tired of seeing the same regurgitated crap. We've seen new accessories come out. It's great that we're seeing new resurgence in the pistol braces, since the pistol brace rule is basically dead on arrival now, because having a national injunction from the Fifth Circuit, and then the ATF is going to have to appeal to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit is the one that's been the most pro-2A in the country. Odds are this is probably going to be okay for the foreseeable future, save going to the Supreme Court where maybe one of the judges flips or a couple of the judges flip, and they're able to keep the ban in place. But I don't see that happening because the ATF has stepped over its judicial authority. It doesn't have this jurisdiction to do what they're done. You cannot arbitrarily make law that prohibit 3/4 of the American populace from having something that they already own without going through the steps. And despite whether it's left or right who's in Congress right now, they haven't done that, so they can't do it. But to get back to the AR-15 thing, how much more innovation can they make on the AR-15 platform? I mean, you can change every piece on the AR-15 to fit the shooter now. Okay, we have optics from A to Z to Z times 2 times 4. Whether you're an LPVO guy or a red dot guy or you're an etched optics guy, they have anything to fit the bill. I remember talking to a guy this last weekend. who was telling me about his AR-15 and how it had optics on it, and that he was going to put irons on it, but he was worried about, actually it was my brother that I was talking to about his AR-10 to be exact, where he was wanting to put irons underneath his optics. Okay, well, what are the odds that your optics are going to fail? I understand having a fail-safe if this is your duty gun, if this is your self-defense gun. You know, my quote-unquote John Wick build has a red dot offset instead of irons, and that's my backup to my LPDO. Okay, I understand having that. If this is a duty gun, if this is a go-to gun for defense, it makes sense. But if this is a hunting rifle, what's the point of having irons when you already have optics? If your optics have failed, what did you do to the gun? You know, this isn't a two-way range. And for those of you that don't know what a two-way range are, it's where people are shooting back at you. If you're hunting and deer or elk or whatever animal you're hunting shoots back at you, you've got other problems to deal with. And you should be wearing body armor when you're hunting if that's the case. But that's not what happens. So on some of your guns, it makes no sense to me. And again, you do you. It's cool if that's what you want to do. But why do you want to make them so heavy? Make them purpose-built for what you need them for, and that rifle is for that purpose. You know, as a collector, someone who enjoys the 2A, who has multiple rifles, they're all each kind of role-based. And yeah, maybe I'm just weird. And there is still a place for just having really cool guns. But where's the innovation, like I said? You know, what are they doing that's so different? They're changing calibers. Some of them are new, interesting calibers. That makes sense to me. Okay? Having a different caliber that you want to change up to, maybe building a rifle, purpose-built rifle for that caliber. Okay. You want it in an AR-15 platform. Okay. More power to you. But the same 5.56 rifle that keeps coming out from all these manufacturers, why? Why haven't you started looking at doing something different, dramatically different? Where are you building the next generation firearms for us? You know, I'm still waiting for energy weapons. I don't think it'll ever happen because of the power source. At least not until I'm really, really old and gray, and I'm already getting old and gray right now. You know, cartridgeless rifles were interesting to me. You know, the G11, if you've never paid attention to that, Ian from Forgotten Weapons calls it Kraut Space Magic. It's a cartridgeless rifle that the Germans adopted for a millisecond before they adopted the G36. Okay, so if you don't know what the G36, it's a polymer-framed 5.56 rifle that's gotten some bad press because it was originally intended never to go to the desert. The Germans never intended it to be fired as long or for as long as they've had to fire it while supporting us in our forever wars that we went through Afghanistan and Iraq. You know, it's weird to see that innovation has been stifled. And it's because we're not asking for something different in the market. Speaking of the foreign stage, let's talk about what's going on with Israel and Palestine. You know, there's a lot of people right now protesting in favor of Palestine because in those protesters' mind, they are pissed off that Israel is using very lopsided and heavy-handed measures to fight and kill these people that fought them first. And I'm of this weird volition probably because I am a Christian, and I do believe Israel is God's chosen land. But I also don't believe in ever letting someone who bloodies your nose get away with it. You know, whether you level them 1-to-1 or toe-to-toe, or it's a country, the minute someone attacks you, all bets are off. You know, that's where the gloves come off, and that's where it becomes, honestly, as sad as it is to say, a free fire zone. Anyone that supports those guys that allowed those attacks, knew about those attacks, or funded those attacks, or supported those attacks on innocent people at raves and people that were just walking around getting shot up at, That's no different than the mass shooters here. And I have no problems taking on a mass shooter if I ever saw one. I've had to deal with that once. I don't want to deal with it again. But that's what's pushed me to that next level of training in medical stuff as well as training with a firearm. Is I will never let another baby, or I will never let a fellow man get shot out without making it a two-way range. That it's sad to see that the state of the world we've gotten to is you have to fight. There is no running anymore. And Israel's failure, I would say intelligence failure, was that they didn't see this coming. And this had been planned for a long time. In Israel, they're calling it their 9/11. Well, okay. I'm not Israeli. I am more so concerned with us sending funds to Israel or to the Middle East for either side, because it's one of those things that, while this may be God's chosen people, encouraging people to fight by funding the side tends to be the wrong answer, because we're not supposed to be violent people anyway, and we're just encouraging violence one way or another. It's one of the reasons why I am still a little bit pissed off that we're sending so much to Ukraine. It's not that I wanted them to all be defeated by the Russians, but it's more so you're just prolonging this war and making it a proxy war. And proxy wars, historically, have never turned out well for the United States. We've ended up in Vietnam, we ended up in Iraq, we ended up in Afghanistan. What is the point of us perpetrating and executing and prosecuting a war for the sake of just keeping it going? And I think the answer is very simple. It's the military-industrial complex. These guys are what fund the government guys, the politicians. They lace them up. That's something we need to think about really hard. And these don't seem like two-way issues, but they're all interconnected. When you start getting into the political sphere, you start seeing that political players that are for one thing that you probably are against, knowing my crowd, knowing my culture, which is the 2A culture, they are anti-gunners. These are the people that are, I never thought I'd see the day that the Democratic Party would be the pro-war party, and yet here we are. They're the ones that are looking at us jumping into the wars that are going on around the world. And after 20 plus years, 25 years, almost 30 years of endless war, I think the American people have had a gut full of it. Understandably so. The American-led world order, that was the global liberal order, is over. Americans are packing their crayons and going home because we've propped up everyone else with no benefit to the homeland. As we get into this so special season, haven't had the year I have had where I've went through my own trials and tribulations. First giving up a career that I loved, trying to start a business and basically have it fail, working my butt off at a job just to get by, just to land where I'm at now, where I have a job in the space that I'm the best I possibly can be at, where my natural talents and abilities lead me to. I am, for all intents and purposes, a great IT person. I am a great engineer in that space. And I'm a great negotiator when it comes to products. And I know how to get things to the end user as fast as I can. There's a market for that. But I'm also a gun guy. And I've been a gun guy since I was 4 or 5 years old because of my family. And my passion, apart from, the IT space, is here. My passion is seeing the people light up. In one of my groups of friends I've recently been acquainted to, I ran into a fellow gun guy, the guy that owns Liberty Guns. And what was really awesome about it was he lit up when we started talking, because there's a brotherhood, a bond when you meet a fellow 2A person, especially when you know that they're in your space, when that they have similar values that align with you. And that's pretty common in our culture. You know, as much as we're demonized for having a culture, we're part of American culture, and we always have been. We've been here since the founding of the country. We're not going away. Gun culture, which is demonized by the left and demonized by mass media, is here to stay. If you want something to see that is the case, look at any movie that's ever been made. Any real popular movie, there's a gun in it. Why? Because it's just a tool. It's just a plot device. You know, some of the best movies you ever see have gunfighters in it, have assassins in it, have stormtroopers in it, all of which are carrying some sort of arm. This is part of American culture. So whether you demonize it or not, it's going to exist. We're going to exist. We're always going to exist. You know, our founding fathers realized very early on that any standing army could lead to a tyrannical state. You know, that our founding fathers were terrified of a standing army, yet they built one so that we could build our country. And despite what people like to think about, you know, despite when they have these little fights in Congress or in the Senate where they're demonizing one side or the other, we can't let one side become so dominant that they can use that standing army against our own people. You know, we've already done it once. The threat of that violence. You know, our country, the people in power, have a monopoly on violence. They can use law enforcement or they can use the military. And we don't have that luxury as American citizens. Now, the American military is not supposed to be used on American soil. But you can't tell me, as you've seen some of these some of these things that have been happening in the news, these riots, these protests, that sometimes you haven't wished that we could put the American military in play. But every time we've done that, it has ended in tragedy. And all you have to do is look at our own history. Look at Kent State. You know, that was a protest that ended up going off the rails because the National Guard came out. But then at the same time, you can look at the Watts riots or the Rodney King riots, the LA riots, and you see that the American military, the National Guard, came in and calmed everything down. So it is a gift and a curse at the same time. How we use things, just like how we use our gun, is a reflection of the person or the group of people. We can't ever let our country become so corrupt and so morally bankrupt that they're willing to use these violent actions against people. That's why we train up who we do. You know, there are tons of training opportunities, tons of things you need to do as a 2A member. You know, to advocate for what we do, to be the best steward of it, to bring forth your best, and to be great. That is something that we need to do all the time in the 2A. We need to be better than everyone else. You know, we need to be the one that has the cooler head when stuff goes down so that we can calm things down until we can't. And then we use that tool in the most violent way possible to end the threat as fast as we can. You know, peaceful people, truly peaceful people, are capable of extreme violence. It's the fact that they're capable of extreme violence that has put them in the place that they're at, because they know what happens when things go sideways. That's why you see soldiers, you see special operators. They're probably some of the most peaceful, humble people you meet, because they have had to go that other route. They've seen what extreme violence does. The last thing anyone should want to do is harm someone else. why isn't one side of the aisle saying that? And why aren't they sticking to it? Instead, they call it a diversity of tactics. Just some mindless musings of what I've seen. I really am curious what you guys think about the AR-15 just being regurgitated time and 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 time again. I'm just tired of seeing it. And it's not that it's not cool, because the AR-15 is obviously cool, but why does everybody need to make something that everyone else has made? We already know it. We can already interswap parts between models. I don't know. I'm getting to where I'm getting back into long-range shooting. I'm testing new optics. I have some primary arms optics that I'm working on for my primary long-range rifle. I'm getting ready for a hunt. I'm one of the few people that drew for a cow elk tag in December. I'm hopefully taking my son on our first elk hunt, for his first elk hunt, with my brother and his son. So I hope you guys have an extremely great Thanksgiving. I will have one more podcast this Wednesday where I will go over why we should be thankful in the 2A. Like, share, subscribe, and most importantly, be great.